Even if you don't know his name, you've probably seen his movies. The Land Before Time, Anastasia. Don Bluth was one of the most promising animation directors of his time, a Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg, but with cartoons. Some even regard The Secret of NIMH as the best animated movie ever made. Standing out amongst his contemporaries, Bluth thrived on dark imagery, emotional storytelling, and risk-taking, all in a time when Disney wasn't doing too great commercially. His success pushed Disney to step up, sparking the Disney Renaissance. So you could say Don Bluth indirectly made The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and all the others. And then Bluth went the other way. Out was the daring, emotionally charged stories. In came commercial-friendly fairy tale musicals. Even today, Anastasia still gets confused for a Disney movie. How did this happen? Are his fairy tale movies really as Disney-esque as they appear? We're going to look into what caused the legendary Don Bluth's Disney era, and why they stand out beyond just being marketable. So now, let's get started. Don Bluth grew up during Disney's golden age, when animation was enchanting. He'd ride his horse to the nearest theater and watch movies like Snow White, Bambi, and Pinocchio. At this time, Disney was the only accessible source for prestige animation. This era for the company is so beloved because there was real artistry behind these films. Fluid movements, attention to detail, it set a high standard to animation, and Bluth decided making life out of drawings was what he wanted to do. His dream came true when he landed a job at Disney, working as an assistant animator on Sleeping Beauty. But he soon left the company, finding the experience kind of boring. The job he had was kind of the bottom of a long ladder. Assistant animators were expected to follow precise instructions, not bring their own ideas. And on a film like Sleeping Beauty, with its stylized, medieval-inspired look, there was little room for anything loose or expressive. But he saw firsthand Disney's creative process before things started going downhill for the company. In 1971, Bluth returned to Disney as an animation trainee, contributing scenes to Robin Hood. By the time The Rescuers was in production, he'd climbed the ranks to directing animator. His first project in that role was Pete's Dragon, followed by several Disney shorts. He was motivated to bring back the magic of the films he grew up watching, when animation was a grand operatic experience, a feeling that Disney sort of left behind when they started drawing with Xerox animation. This gave their films a sketchier, scrappier look, and more episodic story structures. Their priority wasn't to make big instant classics like Cinderella or Alice in Wonderland. Instead, live-action films were the priority, and the medium that made Disney legendary became secondary. But Bluth wasn't in the place to make big creative decisions. Animating for Disney was what he dreamed of as a child, so he was living the dream. The Fox and the Hound was the breaking point. Bluth, along with 17 other animators, saw the company focusing on cutting costs instead of real artistic vision. Creative clashes with studio executives boiled over, and they all left Disney, delaying The Fox and the Hound's release by 6 months. He wanted hand-drawn animation to be a real art form again, not something mechanical just to create a product. He created his own production company, Don Bluth Entertainment, whose first projects were the short Banjo, the Woodpile Cat, and the animated sequences for Xanadu. The rights to the science fiction children's book, Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, was initially offered to Disney, but they turned it down. Don Bluth snapped it up, and in 1982, the dark fantasy, The Secret of NIMH, put his name on the map. With its dark visuals, fast-paced animation, expressive character design, and a willingness to tackle darker themes, the Bluth production company already had their own unique brand of storytelling. There weren't the typical bright colors or musical numbers expected from animation. Instead, it told a serious, complex story, focusing on a mother's journey for survival, not talking down to its audience of children, and is easily palatable to older demographics. The Secret of NIMH hit the perfect balance between artistic integrity and adapting to current popular aesthetics. The success of Star Wars and the Dungeons & Dragons game proved that there was a market for dark but whimsical, otherworldly environments. The 80s was a big time for risk-taking fantasy productions, so The Secret of NIMH fit perfectly in this new trending genre. This movie earned $14 million on a $6 million budget. Good, not a smash, but good. Still far better than what Disney was putting out. They attempted the dark fantasy style with The Black Cauldron, the most expensive animated film at the time, and ended up a box office disaster. Clearly, he left the company at the right time. He followed The Secret of NIMH with the animated video game Dragon's Lair, the highest-grossing arcade game of 1983, and continued that momentum with Space Ace. But unfortunately, the video arcade industry crashed, and there was an industry-wide animation strike, leading his production company to file for bankruptcy. But things would turn around for the best when Bluth collaborated with Steven Spielberg's production company and Universal Pictures. In the 80s, if you attach Spielberg's name to anything, it's a safety net. You're solid. Spielberg's note was simple: make something as beautiful as NIMH. The result was An American Tail. Compared to NIMH, it was a more conventional film, lighter in tone with more humor and musical numbers. America Has No Cats, it seems. But it still wasn't too safe, tackling themes like 19th century immigration, the hardships of American life, and the childhood fear of being alone from your family. This ended up being the highest-grossing, non-Disney animated movie in history. And in the same year, Disney released The Great Mouse Detective, another mouse movie. And even though it did well in the box office, An American Tail still out-earned it. It was released on Thanksgiving weekend, the perfect time for wholesome animated films, but still not too wholesome. Even a movie that stars a bunch of cute animals will still feature some Bluthian scariness, their softness, and edge. And to bring further attention to this movie, a pop version of Somewhere Out There reached number 2 on the US charts and won 2 Grammys. Something The Great Mouse Detective didn't have. This pioneered the moment where an animated movie had to have a pop song tie-in. Bluth followed his wave of success with A Land Before Time, and Disney's Oliver & Company just happened to be released on the same weekend. A Land Before Time was an emotional story about dinosaurs, and Oliver & Company starred a cute animal in a big city with a blend of light and dark imagery, accompanied with a soundtrack of radio-friendly songs. I know that animation takes years to complete, but it's interesting. Both movies were huge hits, but Oliver & Company earned more in the box office. However, Land Before Time did better in overseas market, where they don't have Thanksgiving. It seemed that US families on Thanksgiving break went for the movie that was overall brighter, funnier, and crowd-pleasing. After splitting ties with Spielberg, Bluth released All Dogs Go to Heaven a year later, another emotionally based movie with themes about greed and the acceptance of passing away, even including a scene set in hell. And at the same weekend, Disney released The Little Mermaid, a straightforward fairy tale with a happy ending, polished to perfection, with songs powered by Broadway genius composers. This was not only a financial success, but represented a new direction in the world of animation. Any 80s-style weirdness and experimentation was passé. The new look for animation was stories that felt familiar, and more importantly, easily marketable. Bluth bounced between the UK's Goldcrest Films and Warner Brothers, and more often than not, his ideas got reshaped or watered down based on what investors thought would work. And the result was just confused productions that didn't win over the general public. Rockadoodle, The Pebble and the Penguin flopped, and A Troll in Central Park did abysmally. But one movie in Don Bluth's flop era is pretty well remembered. Inspired by the musical Hans Christian Andersen, he wanted to make a movie that would inspire girls to solve their own problems, which created Thumbelina. Plus, it helped that fairy tale musicals were trending, and it would be great if he had a hit. This period was full of what you could call non-Disney Disney movies, films like The Swan Princess and Quest for Camelot riding that wave. And if you grew up loving these movies, I'm not taking anything away from that, but let's be real. There's a reason they all showed up while Disney was absolutely dominating. Decently faithful to its source material, Thumbelina follows a small girl born from a flower. She feels isolated until she meets the fairies, and she has that moment where she sings with the fairy prince and they fall in love. He gives her a ring after like 5 minutes. Very "we shall be married in the morning" stuff. But of course, it can't be that simple. She's immediately thrown into a parade of, let's call them, questionable suitors. She gets kidnapped by toads, one of which is creepy with her. His mom really gives off boy mom vibes. She is fabulous though. She then encounters a beetle who is also creepy with her and is told to marry a mole who is creepy. But her true love, the fairy prince, is respectful to her, sort of. She marries him and gets wings because it makes better sense for her to be a fairy. So there is clear Disneyisms all over. This is an adaptation of a Hans Christian Andersen story, and even had the voice of Ariel, Jodie Benson, portraying the lead, and she keeps being hounded for her amazing singing voice. Let Me Be Your Wings sounds a little whole new world adjacent. When Thumbelina first meets Cornelius, it looks a lot like when Snow White meets the prince. Dude opens up with, "May I cut in?" holding a sword. He's lucky she didn't pepper spray him. Thumbelina was a box office flop. Critics called it old-fashioned and overtly saccharine. Roger Ebert pointed out that while Disney was riding a creative high, this movie felt stuck in the 70s. The Washington Post wasn't any kinder. The Lilliputian heroine never really grows or changes. She just wanders the forest, fighting off ornery toads, marriage-minded moles, and other quirky little critters. Thumbelina as a character was described as whiny and helpless, when contemporary characters like Ariel, Belle, and Jasmine were written with more agency. Even Odette dared to ask what she is outside of beautiful. Prince Derek has no game. But on a more positive note, the Chicago Tribune said Thumbelina rivaled some of Disney's best work. Wow. And this isn't a complete Disney clone, at least by its design. The animation leaned on rotoscoping, and many fans of Thumbelina note that despite its flaws, there's something about it. Vulture.com claimed Thumbelina as the showgirls of 90s animated films. Like, yeah, a lot of bits are awkward, but the overall result is endearing. It has pretty visuals, an underdog lead. There was something here. The fairy tale direction could work in Bluth's favor. He just needed to refine this new formula. 20th Century Fox approached Bluth to run their animation studio, specifically to compete with Disney. They needed a story that was big, prestigious, and easily marketable. Once again, Bluth turned to classic Hollywood for inspiration. This story drew from the 1956 drama film Anastasia, itself based on the play of a lost duchess discovered in a Berlin asylum after the Russian Revolution. That concept came from the real-life case of Anna Anderson, a woman who claimed to be a surviving Romanov, though this was proven to be false. Now, turning the grim history of the Romanov family and the rise of the Soviet Union into a musical fantasy is absolutely provocative. It's a concept that makes you pause, like when Disney tackled Pocahontas. Should a story like this be made? They might have not intentionally done this, but it's possible they knew that if they made a controversial topic, then the movie will get more attention. It's an eye-catching premise wrapped in a very safe, palatable package. But this was never intended to be a history lesson. The filmmakers explained Anastasia uses history only as a starting point, and that's definitely an explanation. Here, Anastasia survives the revolution. She just gets amnesia. Rasputin, Maleficent enters a party, even though in real life, he was already dead in this timeline. And his image of a mystical healer was just a guise for being an evil sorcerer. I'm guessing he's Jafar's third cousin. Anastasia had all the ingredients of a guaranteed hit. An A-list voice cast with Meg Ryan, John Cusack, and Doc Brown himself, Christopher Lloyd as Rasputin. A strong soundtrack with late 90s it girl, Aaliyah, singing a pop rendition of Journey to the Past. And the setup is pure gold. There's a female lead who wants more out of life and happens to be a lost princess with an animal sidekick. Con artists looking for a fake Anastasia to collect a reward, they could have brought this icon. The scheme writes itself. The two leads had that 90s haters to lovers storyline, the stubborn girl, and the snarky, sort of Byronic guy dynamic, where all their bickering is a form of secret flirting. And there was the, "I was just a bet," or "it was all just for money" thing in the third act. And this is a movie about a princess. What more could you ask for? Also, the fashions just eats. Her dress has a translucent veil. This was hand-drawn animation. And if you're a 1920s pop culture and history nerd, the musical number, Paris Holds a Key to Your Heart, is a dream. Anastasia borrows heavily from the Disney playbook, but it overall feels like a mature story. It's rooted, loosely, in real history, not a fully fantastical world, and the storytelling, at least at times, feels less formulaic. Even with his distinct style, during this fairy tale era, Bluth kept getting stuck in Disney's shadow, at least in the public eye. The Phoenix wrote, "If imitation is indeed the sincerest form of flattery, then the folks at Disney would feel royally complimented by 20th Century Fox's new animation feature." Anastasia was Bluth's biggest hit to date, and his first successful project in 8 years. And even in his comeback, Disney was still obsessed with him. On the same weekend, they re-released The Little Mermaid. It hasn't even been 10 years, and put out Flubber, a big-budget comedy with an A-list lead. But longevity tells a different story. Anastasia has all the trademarks of a comfort movie. We start with a snow-filled winter imagery, which changes into springtime pathways. It's springtime in Paris. Anastasia stands out as a different type of princess. She's a snarker, sure, but her motivation isn't becoming royalty, but uncovering the mystery of her past. She goes along because it's a possibility. The signs that she knows about line up. The soundtrack is still loved. Once Upon a December could be found in virtually every Princess Core playlist in 2021. Bluth took a lot of notes from Disney, but I'd say he did it better. Anastasia just felt more grown up. It wasn't afraid to be still, sit in quiet moments, and let the characters just talk. There are the action beats, but this is foremost a dialogue-heavy film. If anything holds it back, the musical didn't hit quite as hard as it could have. So Don Bluth was back on track, and 20th Century Fox wanted more. The next project, Titan AE, was going to finally leave his Disney era behind. No more fairy tales, no more musical numbers. This was going back to his roots, but with a sci-fi action edge. This is a modern, edgy film that wasn't only geared towards kids, but features elements that the high school or even college demographic would like. It had a recognizable cast, Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore, and pushed an ambitious blend of 2D and CGI animation. This was a risky move, but Bluth is a risk taker. Titan AE cost between $75 to $90 million and didn't return even half of that in the box office. This was the last time he'd work as a feature film director. He steered his direction away from movies and focused on writing and teaching. I think he left at the right time. In the early 2000s, 2D animation was hanging by a thread and soon enough became basically invisible in the mainstream movie market. On top of everything, it seemed that the structure of making movies, working with big-name studios, clashing with producers, all the stress with box office, it's just too cynical. Don Bluth started his own studio to make the films he wanted to make. But in Hollywood, the artist gets overlooked. It's called the movie business. They like formulas, predictable box office results, charts. There's not a lot of room for creative visions. He then took on smaller animated projects for video games and music videos. And in 2020, he established Don Bluth Studios to keep the art of 2D animation alive. It's clear to see that CGI animation is currently the default, mostly due to production comfort. 3D animation is cheaper and easier to finish compared to starting with a pen and paper. But 2D animation has a certain magic to it. There's expressiveness, unique designs, and personality that's harder to replicate with a computer. Don Bluth stood out amongst his contemporaries because he wasn't just making movies, but was a risk taker, pushed boundaries, and brought full-fledged emotion in children's media. Even when he experimented with the Disney formula, he brought his own voice, his own style, and a dedication to craft that left a mark on animation history. And that's all I have for Don Bluth's Disney era. Which one of his films is your favorite? Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!